Welcome to Gallant Conversations. Gallant is a business-to-business consultancy specializing in industrial innovation.
We drive growth for our clients through strategies and insights in brand management and strategic communications.
If you're in an industry focused on progress at the macro level, we're here to facilitate a conversation, starting now.
All right, welcome to Gallant Conversations. I'm your host, James, and we have today here Eric Sunby with TerraSpace, founder. Great, Eric. It is awesome to have you here. Love to, have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, James, thanks for having me. Eric Sunby co-founded TerraSpace a couple years back here in Texas. We are a mineral exploration company and multiple generation Texan, not sure exactly how far that goes back. Grew up north of San Antonio and have worked in the space industry and national security for some time.
Okay, so what's your elevator pitch for TerraSpace? One sentence, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that we are a mineral exploration company that employs machine learning technology and sensors to allow us to do on-site, in situ analysis.
What is in situ?
So like I said, on-site, right? So that's when you're doing an activity in the location in which the source material or what's needed, to be done is there, right? Instead of sending something to a lab or taking something from that location and doing something with it at another location.
Got it. All this industry jargon and AI stuff. Cool.
Sorry.
So no, that's incredible. And TerraSpace, you must have a rich background in terms of your education and the experiences that you have. Can you just start telling us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I kind of, I guess.
Sooner?
Yeah.
You a little Sooner guy?
Yeah, I am. I took the Robert Frost to heart, I guess, in taking the road less traveled. I am, probably fifth or sixth generation Texan, right? But I went to the University of Oklahoma. Don't hold that against me.
It's rough.
And boomer, by the way. Did my degree in economics there. Graduated in 2018. To your question about kind of my education background, right? After that, I decided that I wanted to study something that was a little bit different than economics to diversify my educational background. My intent at the time was to go into the military, serve. I went and did my master's in international security at the University of Glasgow, which is in Scotland. They have a very strong what's called war studies. That's a field that's generally in academia over in the UK. We don't really see that here much. So they have a very strong background in Glasgow.
Let me pause that real quick. So you say they don't really do that here that much, being the U.S. Why would you say that? Yeah,
so the way the academic systems in the UK and the United States have, I guess, evolved over time, the British system, due particularly to the empire that they had, led them to have schools of strategy, right? Mm-hmm. Which evolved into schools of war studies.
Naturally,
So war studies is very broad, right? So it encompasses everything from the way that society interacts with war, from media, right? From even a branding and perspective, right? Communications, to actual strategy, right? Military strategy, defense strategy, and security strategy. And then of course history as well, right? So they blend it all together in a very, I think it's somewhat more effective than how we sometimes have done it. Here in the U.S., we keep it divided, right? So if you want to go study military history, you go study military history. If you want to go study national security, you go study that.
So that's kind of, I guess, why you have a little collection of PhDs or all these little degrees. You have another one or two? How many you got?
So I have I then went to the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State.
Was that before or after?
That was after.
Okay.
And there I got a Master's of Global Management, which is essentially an MBA in international business. It's not
Building on the
an MBA,
economics,
right?
okay.
Yeah, so building on that, but from a business perspective, I was recruited there by a professor who actually is on our advisory at TerraSpace. He's very active in the space industry, and
What's his name?
his name is Dr. Greg Autry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So he recruited me into that program. Did that. It was about a year long. And then completing my PhD in aerospace sciences at the University of North Dakota, which is a more technical program that looks into the breadth of aviation space. My focus, of course, is space, given some of my background. I will say I'm not a believer in going and collecting degrees. All of these actually, for me, worked perfectly and did a lot for my career. I'm not the kind of person who would advise on necessarily taking the path that I did.
Yeah, for sure. Seems like a lot of work, but it seems like it's all paying off at the same time in a sense, right? You put your head down, continue forward, and so you have a collection of degrees. That's great.
Yeah.
And I before we kind of get into the next bit, the North Dakota, their university over there, like that was one of the first online programs, right? Because of the remote learning aspect, and they have a specialized United States Space Force or Space Force or like something pertaining to the Space Force. Kind of educational.
Yeah, they do. So University of North Dakota, a lot of people don't know this, and I wouldn't expect them to. It's fairly innovative, and in fact, they were one of the first to kind of revolutionize how they deliver education, particularly for people who might not be able to go to a campus, right? And so back in the 80s, they found a way to, hey, we'll tape the lecture, right? We'll put it on a VHS and we'll ship it to the person alongside the assignments. They watch the lectures, they do the assignments, and they ship it back to us and we grade it, right? Yeah. And that, they were the only university in the world that was doing that I've known about, that anybody's ever recorded.
I guess you kind of have to, being in North Dakota and all that.
Yeah,
right? Like
it's a very remote location. Yeah. But the reason that they got into aerospace was because a lot of our strategic nuclear forces, ICBMs, particularly silos, are located in that part of the country. And so a lot of those officers and enlisted personnel, when they wanted to get a higher education, they didn't know where to go, right? And the University of North Dakota kind of came in and was like, hey, well, we can offer them a higher education in aerospace, right, from our university, which enables them to continue their career and kind of, boost their career here while they're stationed in a very remote location.
Yeah, and is there another degree out there, or like what other school? Florida? Did you mention that at all? Or
I was at Florida Institute of Technology for what's called a graduate certificate, so it's not really a degree. It was a summer program, fully, funded, whatnot, and it was in commercial space studies. So it was kind of, the field of commercial space was really starting to blossom. This was around 2020. That's when you really started to see SpaceX with that pace, right, increasing. You also started to see us take back our sovereignty of launch capabilities for human spaceflight. And so Florida Institute of Technology had a interesting program. I did a couple of courses that translated into my PhD, but that's where TerraSpace kind of really got its roots.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that, right? And that's where you met your co-founder, Victor, over in Spain, just doing his thing, trying to bring him on back over here.
Yeah, so at that time I was working at the Space Force Association, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, but let's just kind of put a bow on this bit, which is okay. Let's just make sure that we're getting this little story arc right. So, Sooner to Florida.
No, to Glasgow.
Yeah. Glasgow to Florida.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously somehow, or just around North Dakota, and then you finished over in ASU.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I just wanted to kind of get that timeline right. And, from what my understanding, ASU is just a freaking powerhouse, just global powerhouse. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but maybe kind of shine a little bit light on that and the opportunities, right? Because you mentioned Greg Autry, right? Dr. Greg Autry. And does he go by Doctor or Greg? Just Greg?
You can call him Greg.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Okay. So, they opened up some doors for you, right? You
They did.
testified on some stuff.
Yeah, so connections that I made there were pretty impressive. It allowed me to testify before the House Committee on Natural Resources from the perspective of TerraSpace, right? So they, fellow students and professors there had those connections, made that happen. That was December of 2023 that we testified. I testified alongside Dr. Autry on that panel. As well as other things. I mean, they've hosted events for TerraSpace at their downtown Los Angeles campus, which enabled us to get in front of investors. It enabled us to get in front of leaders in this field. And that event was, just a couple of hours, but they opened their doors, right? And they really empowered their students and their alumni. As you said, they were a powerhouse. They are a powerhouse. They have multiple schools. They have one that's very interesting. It's the School for Earth and Space Exploration. So they take kind of a unique approach on how they set up degree programs that enable future workforce development, as well as leaders in the field of space exploration in particular, as well as others, right? Thunderbird is an interesting school. It was the very first school that focused on international business and trade as a field of study. So when you look at how the United States does commerce, how it does trade, how it does international business, it's generally a Thunderbird alumni is attached to that in some way.
Yeah, no. And I just wanted you kind of mention a little bit about that ASU bit and how everything kind of ties in with the timeline. And I mean, like what? So how we're here today, right? So we met through your work at Space Force Association. You were the executive director at the time. We were trying to do some stuff here in the state of Texas. I think we were successful in that. So how do you think the Space Force Association helped influence and help support all the other things that you had going on, be it your education? I mean, I think they opened up some opportunity for you with ASU, if I'm not mistaken.
They did, yeah.
So just kind of touch on that.
Yeah, so I joined Space Force Association in the spring of 2020, just after the Space Force had been established earlier in December 2019. So my role there was Director of Government Affairs. I had previously worked in a congressional office, and so had some connections in that realm. SFA wanted to kind of engage with the Hill. So my first task was setting up the Space Force Caucus in the House and the Senate. I worked very closely with members in both of those chambers to get that stood up, and it worked within 4 months. I thought it was going to take much longer than 4 months, but in 4 months we got a Space Force Caucus stood up. And for those who don't know what a caucus is, it's a formal group that of like-minded people within the House or the Senate that care about a specific topic. So it's a forum that enables them to get away from all the noise of day-to-day committee work and things like that, and be able to come into a room, meet with people who understand that topic, meet with the general public on that topic. And they span so many different areas, right? NASA had a NASA caucus. There's even like the Congressional Whiskey Caucus. So like
Gotta have that.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like there's so many different caucuses out there. So Space Force Caucus got stood up in a few months. During that time when we were standing it up, that's when I was at Florida Tech, and that's when I met Victor and TerraSpace happened. I probably wouldn't have gotten into Florida Tech if it hadn't been for meeting, with some of its professors through SFA, right? So like you said, SFA did do a lot for me, both there, but also in other respects. I mean, it built a massive network in the space sector.
Yeah, and and all that Space Caucus work that you had done on the federal side, I guess we should say, kind of attracted us together to kind of help band the state of Texas and help do something very similar in a sense to help support that. And then, you're, I guess, seeing the dominoes effect from Texas all the way to Arizona, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So after we worked on the early stages of the what became the Texas Space Commission now, right? I was personally contacted by leaders in multiple states that wanted to kind of follow suit. And you can see the impact that what happened here, how it's gone throughout the country.
And it's exciting, right? Like, that's just great to see, a success in one place and then, people wanting to duplicate that success. And it's all about kind of the greater collaboration of it all, right? The whole is greater than some of its parts. I don't remember the full quote. It's pretty long. But that's how we Yeah. So, but anyway, so... when we talk about space, we talk about commercialization, the economics behind it, the security implications of it, national security implications, and the military aspect of it all. Let's talk about TerraSpace, and maybe first just talk about how it came to be, like what inspired you to start it.
Yeah, so like I said, when I was at Florida Tech, I met Victor. You mentioned him earlier. Victor Bautista is my co-founder. He's a CTO at TerraSpace. He's from Spain, aerospace engineer, PhD, very bright guy, right? We met in this program. We were actually, it was one of those assignment early on. We were partnered, in an assignment, and so we got to know each other a little bit there. Then we ended up being on the same capstone together. The capstone essentially asked us to answer a problem, right? Come up with a company, but do it in a very robust way. I mean, build out pro formas, do the whole 9 yards, right? And then pitch it. We did that, and part of our team went on to eventually found TerraSpace based on kind of that early stage, idea that we had at Florida Tech. Now, what we are doing at TerraSpace right now is pretty different. I need to make that clear. It's not the same of what we were doing, in that student program. But obviously, without that program, I probably would have never met Victor. TerraSpace wouldn't exist, right?
So yeah, the Florida capstone project and the early formation of TerraSpace, that was more so applicable to space and solving a challenge for space.
Yes.
But the evolution of TerraSpace, you started to see, I guess, the emphasis that you wanted to hold on the mining sector. Do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit on that? Because that's interesting, right? Whereas you were solving a problem for space and kind of all this stuff about asteroid mining and all that. And, I think this would be a whole different podcast talking about the implications and like the challenges associated to mine an asteroid or get on the lunar surface. Maybe we won't get too deep on that. Definitely could. We're bringing it back down to earth. Let's kind of talk a little bit about that pivot and that shift.
No pun intended.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so, when I was looking at it, my background is economics, right, first and foremost. I was very skeptical about the quick ROI potential or true profitability in a short period of time for a company that was interested in mining a celestial body or asteroids. Most startups, there was a report, I think yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, that most startups have failed. We always hear the statistics, right? But like more than expected.
Well, Wall Street Journal too. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, what's today's date? The 21st of August?
Yeah.
So like on the 20th, 19th as well, like they were bashing, I'm like, no, I'm not like pointing fingers or anything, the clean tech industry too, right? And I think the 2025, it's going to get, I think it's great for them to shed light on that, right? But like, climate goals, space, all this stuff, like 2025, this is the freaking year. That's what our team at Gallant's been saying, right? Our publicists and stuff like that. Like they are trying to see, okay, we've been talking about all these big, bold goals.
Yes.
Put your money where your mouth is. Let's see what's going on.
And that's where I think the Wall Street Journal, I'm not going to praise them or critique them here, right? I mean, they're an institution. They have problems. They have great things that come out of them too, right? The reports that you're seeing are they're coming from a realistic standpoint, right? They're looking at it and starting to question. It's like, hey, we've seen all these things. There's been all this buzz about a lot of these different topics, but where are the serious ones, right? Where are the companies that are really going to be able to break through here and create an innovation in a field that is going to be very positive and impactful in the ways that we've wanted to see, right? For most of these fields. So for space, people saying, hey, we're going to go mine an asteroid.
Or mine the moon, for that matter.
Or mine the moon in a very short period of time, right? You're hearing startups coming out getting a lot of money and saying that they're going to do this within just a few years. I'm very skeptical, and knowing the mining sector and the economics there, the math isn't adding up.
No, yeah, because I mean, look, okay, again, I say the date August 22nd or 21st, whatever, of 2024.
21st.
21st. All right, yeah. I can't get my days right. And in the next few weeks, we'll have billionaire Jared Isaacman partnered up.
Yep. Purchased
a couple of tickets over with SpaceX. So 3 missions total. He's already had his first orbit.
Polaris Dawn's gonna.
Yeah, and Polaris Dawn is going to go halfway to the moon, right? Yeah. So we as humans have not set foot on the lunar surface since
1972.
Thank you. And then on top of that, local company, we're based here in Houston, startup Intuitive Machines. Yeah. Shout out to Intuitive Machines on this, but they just earlier this year, 6 months ago in February, if I'm not mistaken, the 28th or whatever, they landed on the moon. Maybe they were a little off on their target by a few miles or what have you.
And they admit that.
They landed on there, and then maybe it was a little tipsy.
And they transmitted signals, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, this is a difficult industry. People always say space is hard. It's become kind of a trope. Yeah. I don't really like that trope anymore. But at the end of the day, it's a difficult field, right? And being so confident that you're going to make a massive ROI and you're going to start to make it to where us as humans no longer rely on the things that are mined from Earth, and we're focusing on things that are mined in space within a fairly short period of time, which is what some of these companies are positing, right? I think it's a little too, I don't even want to say it's too optimistic, because I consider myself an optimist. I think it's entering into fantasy land.
So give me a timeline. Before you give me the timemeline, what's the furthest that you've kind of that we as a collective humanity, how far have we dug on the lunar regolith, the surface?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So
a couple meters.
2.92 meters to be perfectly exact. I believe that was Apollo 17. If not, it was in one of the last 3 Apollos, and that was a core sample. It's not like a core sample that you would take here on Earth, because you're not really drilling into a hard surface. You're drilling into the regolith, so it's still just regolith. We believe that regolith ends at about 5 to 10 meters in depth throughout the lunar surface. And that is that's how deep we've gone. Beneath that, we don't exactly know what's there. There's a lot of theories. But we just don't know what's there. And then when you get into what we focus on, right, you really don't know what's there, because what we're trying to understand is the complex composition of the geology.
Well, and through your testimony with, God, I'm blanking on it, Natural
Resources Committee. Yeah.
You provided the USGS or the committee a map. Maybe Nico can try and find that.
Yeah,
and
we'll get that map for you.
Yeah, and kind of post it up real quick. But so maybe talk about the significance of the lunar surface and the minerals that are present.
Yeah, so what's interesting about the moon is that we don't know much about it. So when people tell you, oh, well, it has this stuff and this stuff and this stuff, that is generally from what we call visual spectra, which is observed through a telescope or some of the information that we've taken from the surface samples, right? We're still learning things about the moon. So, for instance, Chang'e 6, I believe, which is a Chinese rover that was on the far side of the moon. It took a sample, returned it back to Earth. That's a very costly endeavor. What we're trying to do is actually replace that process. We want to be able to send the lab to the moon rather than having to send the sample back. And we'll get into that in a moment. Yeah, at TerraSpace. We'll get into that in a moment. And we'll go back to your question about why are we focusing on Earth and what's the Earth market?
Oh shoot, yeah, that was like 20 minutes ago for sure.
No, it's, I mean, we can go in all the weeds, but this is important, right? Because I'm about to explain the complexity as to now why we are focusing on Earth, but still keeping this vision, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at the moon, right, we don't know too much about it. Chang'e 6 was on the far side. They discovered graphene, right? Graphene is a fairly...
What year was that?
That was literally just a few months ago, right? So we didn't know that the moon had graphene in it. Now we do, right? It's there. How much is there?
We don't know.
That's a question.
So what's the significance of graphene?
Well, graphene can be used for a multitude of strategic resource, strategic, I guess, products, right? Services. Generally, technology products, right? Graphene is used in a lot of technology products at low quantities. Into the national security side of things, right? You have sensors. You have various technical products, right? High tech products. Given that graphene here on Earth, most of it is in China. Most of it is produced by China, and we'll get to that in a moment, right?
So they so happen to stumble upon some more graphene on the lunar surface. That's great.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Exactly,
I mean,
right? But
doubling down.
Exactly, they're doubling down. So the problem is now we're discovering new things, right? Sometimes we as humans get a little too haughty, and we get a little too siloed in our viewpoints. So sometimes you'll have a professor say, "Oh, well, this is what the moon's not made up of anything valuable, right? Beyond water, ice, and helium-3, right?"
Granted that's where Intuitive was going, and well, for that purpose, the water deposits and on the southern pole, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very tough...
And water deposit, that is a very tough place to land due to just orbital...
And we were forced over there because of maybe some of the implications with China?
Yes.
Because they were already on the far side?
They are on the far side, and they also said, "Hey, we want to land on the southern pole too," right? So now there's kind of this little gold rush of sorts to the southern pole, seeing who can land there first.
It's the new California guys, move over to the moon.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And so
great weather, right?
But perfect weather. Those radiation storms. No,
for sure.
If you ever watched For All Mankind, there's that one that just really gets you in the. Particularly, right, the goal was go after the water ice. And that's a completely understandable thing, right? I mean, drinking water, you can separate oxygen from it, right? You can create rocket fuel, right? So many different reasons as to why you'd want to get that. But a lot of people have kind of ignored, not necessarily ignored, but said we'll focus on the hard minerals later because we don't necessarily want to go there for that right now. The point is now we're discovering some that are there, right? And so now it's creating this situation of like, okay, well, are we going to go to it and when? I don't know. You asked on timeline. From TerraSpace's perspective, we want to have a system on the lunar surface within probably 7 to 10 years, being realistic.
That's bold still.
It is still bold. I agree with you. It's still bold. But I think that's a realistic, bold approach.
There's another startup out there. I think their name is Interloon. What was their timeline?
I don't remember their exact timeline, but I do believe...
They're focusing on helium.
They are focusing on helium-3, and they want to extract it and ship it back here. So... I'm not sure, but I do know that it was fairly shorter.
Why ship it back when you can just leave it there?
I think they might have had some of that,
that seems like very...
I think that was their first approach, is like we can at least like extract it, confine it into a box or whatever that may be, leave it there, and then when we can go get it, we can go get it. Nevertheless, the thing that's going to be taking their extractors, right, is Starship most likely, or something similar to it, and that obviously they rely on that being fully developed and capable of delivering large payloads to the lunar surface before they can actually start doing that on the lunar surface.
Yeah.
Right?
So we first have
this is kind of wrapping back into why are we focusing on Earth?
Yeah, and I want to just kind of okay, so there's a graphic out there that our team put together, Nico and Casey, fantastic job of kind of the, I guess a roadmap, and I think I got some flack on this because like it was like the roadway to, I forget, the deep space superhighway or something like that.
I remember you showing that to me.
Yeah, and like okay, I'm sure there are different angles of attack, if you will, and routes that you can go about, but it was really just a tool to visualize, and I think Nico's going to put it up on here, which is kind of showing the different orbits, where's what, Hubble, and then also the new what's the new telescope called? I'm blanking on it right now.
James Webb.
Thank you. And the distances and the Lagrange points or what have you, and all that good bit. So we have that up right now. Let's just visualize that, and we low Earth orbit is completely just saturated with satellites, right? And that's where the ISS is kind of chilling, just right around that middle low Earth. And then we kind of venture a little bit further. We mentioned Jared Isaacman later in the next few weeks. He'll go halfway to the moon. Yeah. And then Intuitive just landed, not a human, but landed on the moon. Yeah. I'm bringing this all back because, we've landed on the moon. Humans are halfway there, hopefully in the next couple weeks. Props to them, seriously, because they're risking their freaking life doing it. Yeah. God. Would you do that? Yeah. Okay, cool. I think I would
in
too.
A heartbeat.
Screw it. And then, so to take advantage of all the resources on the lunar surface, you'll not just have to be able to be present on there. You have to have a sustained presence on there. You may have to worry about the kick up when you're landing in terms of the regolith churning up, because the regolith in the dust is kind of
very fine.
Yeah, fine. It could puncture some stuff, mess up some equipment, carcinogenic emissions inhaled into you. So it's a freaking harsh environment. It is. Right? And then, so we got to get that down.
You got to get a lot of infrastructure in place to be able to start extracting and utilizing it, even in situ, right? So even there. So you want to build infrastructure there, right? Or we haven't
even gotten to the drill bit, right?
So there's so many different things that make it complex, right? And then when you start looking at all of these complexities, you're like, okay, it's going to take we have to take this in steps, right? Yeah. Some people are trying to answer, question number 10, right, in this process, and we haven't, we barely are answering that first question is, can we land, right? Which we're going to answer it, and it's going to be yes, but it's going to take time, right? All of these steps take time, right?
And
from a business perspective, can you start trying to answer question 10 and wait that long? To start making good revenue and profits, right? Generally, in business, the answer is no, right? You need to really start, figuring out who your customers are, and producing, having a consistent revenue stream to be able to make ROI and to be able to scale as a business and be sustainable.
And in the space industry, commercial space industry, you only really have two customers: the government and the military. Correct?
Yeah. So, which at the end of the day, they're the same kind of, right? And either civil or military.
Yeah, and I think Intuitive Machines, and I guess maybe it's just our exposure to them and being in Houston and stuff, they do a really good job of kind of developing out these creative partnerships and strategic partnerships. Thanks to their team over there with Columbia, Nokia, and then all these other groups.
And that can enable their company to be sustainable, right? And build up. But remember, right, they're still focusing on that question 1. Right? Yeah. So they're opening up access to the moon. Yeah. And then we have to build the infrastructure to then start doing extraction and yeah.
So, I mean, I just kind of want to VCs out there doing their due diligence and all that stuff, really paying in mind in terms of, okay, these are the 1 through 10. And, we're throwing a lot of money over at some companies that are trying to answer question 10.
Yeah, closer to question
we're
10.
not even on the surface yet. We just got there, Intuitive. Thank you so much. But, let's throw the money at where we're really trying to solve these, problems to address the infrastructure component and the transportation routes.
Exactly. So that brought us right back. We talked about space, right?
Yeah.
Now we're going to go talk about Earth. Is that fine? Can we feel good transition?
I guess. I don't know, man.
All right. So
you asking the questions now? For sure. Let's go.
So you asked, right? What, why is TerraSpace focused on Earth, right? You kind of hinted at that question earlier. Because if you look at our name, TerraSpace, right? Terra is Latin.
Super clever.
Thank you. For Earth, right? And so we're focused on both, right? For those people who are concerned, we're not focused on space enough, trust me, we hold the vision, right, for space. But we are focused on Earth as well. This is our home. This is where we live. And until we do have that intense access and infrastructure built out on celestial bodies like the moon and potentially, in the asteroid belt and further out on other planetary bodies, we have to mine the Earth, right? We have no choice about that until that happens. If we don't mine, you don't get any of the things you generally like, right? We can't do this podcast. We don't have a camera. We don't have
Can't do ChatGPT.
Can't do ChatGPT.
That's unfortunate.
You can't order, DoorDash or whatever, favor here in Texas, right? It's pretty popular.
You can't mess with the petrochemical, the petro, right? Anything petro related. And then, there might be an argument, and gosh, I wish I would have asked Moji when he was on here, co-founder of Vito, synthetic bio startup. Mm-hmm. You could also make the argument, without the mining industry, you can't have bioplastics as well.
Yes.
So, exactly. It's a critical component to the industrial supply chain.
It is the centerpiece of all of our lives. And we don't ever think about it. And what's interesting is when we talk about supply chains, right? COVID brought the phrase supply chain into the common vernacular to where, you run into someone on the street and they generally know what supply chains are, right?
So COVID, there was a good outcome.
There was slightly of a good outcome. The problem is the one thing that people still forget or just don't really recognize is that everybody's concerned about the supply chain. But there is no supply chain if we do not control resources. And so I'm going to say a phrase and then I'll go into TerraSpace and the Earth. This quote, a good friend of mine loves to cite it all the time, and I'm going to get a little sci-fi on you. But the quote comes from Baron Harkonnen from Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune. And he says, "He who controls the spice controls the universe." Right, so spice mining was a big thing, right, in his books, right, and throughout a lot of science fiction, you'll see a lot of mining being centerpieces to stories sometimes, right. So when we were looking at how do we be a sustainable business in the meantime before we can make our system go to the lunar surface and start doing the fun space stuff that we all love, right? In our company, we all have space backgrounds. We wanted to find out how can we sell this product or service here on Earth, right? And so we looked at the challenges, particularly in the mining sector here on Earth for exploration, because we were an exploration-based company. We wanted to know what was in the lunar environment. So where are the gaps in the exploration process here in earth mining? And what we found actually shocked us. The earth mining industry, and I should just say mining, right? The mining industry is very traditional, right? It is innovative, but it moves slowly, right? Particularly here in the United States, for instance, it takes 10 to 15 years for our legal processes to approve a mine, right? From the initial kind of, hey, we want to mine this area to we're starting to dig and blast, it can take 10 to 15 years, right?
Just to get it online.
Just to get it online. And that is purely regulatory. That is because we are extremely environmentally conscious in this country. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we're going to talk about how that impacts us from a national security perspective in a moment. And so for us, we were like, okay, well, that's a long period of time, right? So innovation is not adopted at the same speed as you see maybe in oil and gas, or particularly very innovative sectors like space and computing, right?
With like technology, just like software.
Yeah, exactly, right? So what we found was with the mineral analysis process particularly, so what you do when you want to start a mine, or even if you want to expand an existing mine, is, and throughout the life cycle of the mine as well, you'll take all these core samples, right? And if you watch our intro video, you'll see it at the very beginning, you'll see off in the distance all these holes. If you pay close attention, you'll see all these holes in this field, right? And what that is they're taking these large core samples. They also might be putting explosives down there to then do blasting as well, right? But what these core samples give us is extremely important information that can allow us to determine the ore grade, right? Ore grade is an economic term. It's not a scientific term. Ore grade essentially is, what is the economic viability of mining here, right? You may find gold, but you may find all these minerals around it that cause it to be difficult to extract, and actually would make it to where you're not going to make money at all, so you're going to lose money, right? So you just don't mine it. You leave the gold, right? And this happens for all sorts of different minerals, right? It's not just gold. So you really need this knowledge before you start committing hundreds of millions of dollars to blast an area or to start digging, right, to extract the mineral you want. On top of that, the current process, when they extract this core, they generally ship it to a lab, right? So you asked earlier, in situ, right? What does that mean? Well, now they're shipping it off site, right? They're not doing the analysis in situ, on site, right? They do the analysis at these labs. They generally have a lot of human oversight over the core analysis process, and it can take weeks to months to get your results back, right? So what we did is we're like, okay, well, what is the process that they do at these labs? They use a lot of these sensors. Some sensors they don't use. Maybe they're too expensive, or maybe the lab just hasn't adopted it yet.
How much are these sensors and how many you got in there? Contraption.
Yeah, it varies, right? So sometimes these labs may only have one each, right?
So you have to go boom, 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 all across.
So it takes a long period of time. So, so let's say you have maybe 10, mineral analysis labs, in the United States. That's not true, but let's just say you have that, right? You are getting 100 mines sending to a single lab, right? Mm-hmm. Their core, right? And so that's a lot of mines that you're getting, right? On top of that, you are sometimes by hand having to analyze these cores with these sensors, and then getting that data and then looking at the core and doing a lot of interpolation, right? That takes a lot of time, right? What we did is we said, okay, there's all these sensors, right?
All around the world.
Well, there's all these sensors, sometimes produced by companies in various countries, right? And we want to get them on a single rig, right? The size of kind of like a dining table, right? Put a conveyor on there instead of you having to get these core. They'll put core in these wooden boxes, right? They'll have these little lanes, right? And they'll put like maybe 4 or 5 core, right, in there. And they break it up, right? I mean, the core could be 200 meters in depth, but they'll break it up into these little segments, right, to make it easier. And then they run it under their sensors, right? We wanted to make it as fast as possible, so you put a conveyor belt on there. But the key here was the human problem, right? The human oversight problem.
Be careful.
Yeah, I know. But the human problem was we looked at core far too long. It was taking us weeks to months to get the results, right? And we also had to look at the core generally, right? And so what we did is we said, okay, let's build a neural network, a machine learning algorithm, right, that can connect the data from each sensor, right? And then over time, based on training from what's called ground truth, right? That ground truth is like what we do know for certain about certain samples, which means that actually that original analysis that the human did is going to help train this algorithm, right? And so what you do is you take the raw data and you put the raw data into the algorithm, and then you have the ground truth, which is what the analysis was from that core that the human did. And then when the algorithm spits out its result, you can compare with that ground truth, right? When we did that the very first time, we had 95% accuracy compared to the ground truth.
That's not 100% great in terms of software, right? Like, or is it?
So the 95% accuracy, that was amazing. That the that the algorithm actually kind of knew the pattern, right, without actually being trained by, mind you. So we kind of threw it at an untrained algorithm, and it knew it.
Got
right?
to 95%.
It got to 95%. Now, this was a single core, right, and that core was not necessarily homogeneous, but it was more homogeneous than some core that we'll be receiving from a lot of our, commercial partners. That being said, right, that was an amazing first step, right? And so then we added more core in, and you have some challenges. Sometimes the algorithm gets confused. It's like you're teaching a child, right? And so you're having to teach the child these patterns. But here's the difference, is when that algorithm builds, it has a library, right? So like the moment it sees something new, it can go back into its library and compare to trillions of data points in seconds. A human can't do that. A human can get a PhD, we can spend decades of our life looking at things, but we only process information so fast, right? A computer can process it and not get tired. It cannot get hungry. It cannot get, it's very different from the human oversight.
It will need heating and cooling. It'll
need power, right? It'll need power.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a key point as to keeping having multiple capabilities, right? The algorithm, should it be on site? Probably not when you're looking at.
You can have it in a remote location and just super farm.
Exactly, right? You can, right? And so there are, there's different power sources that we're looking at for remote locations.
For remote locations, but given that, like again, if you're just able to kind of feed the signal on over, you can just
if you can feed
offsite.
Exactly.
Which makes a lot of sense, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense, and for a security reason, nobody's stealing the algorithm, right? That's another one. So, right, so that what that does is that cuts down a mine's lead time, right, to get results from its core by potentially 2 months, weeks. I mean, you're getting it in hours now instead of weeks or months. So it rapidly changes.
And let's just make sure that we got this right. So 2 months with the human component.
With the human component, right? Right. So that's what we're replacing, right? Mining companies, they loved it. They know what we're doing. We have some great LOIs with some companies. We have American Gilsonite Company, which is actually headquartered here in Houston. They have their primary mine in Utah. We have Rio Tinto, which is the second largest mining company in the world, with an LOI, particularly out of their Resolution Copper site in Arizona. Chatting with a company down in Chile. So it's been pretty interesting seeing the industry reaction. They're definitely supportive and excited to see what is offered, because it's going to enable them to do analysis in ways that they just haven't before.
So how are you able to kind of develop out all these partnerships? I mean, that's pretty incredible. So you're developing out a piece of hardware in the deep tech industry, and you've gotten 2 LOIs with some pretty major names, I guess, like, what's your board composition looking like? Yeah,
so one of our advisors is Dr. James Riley. He's the immediate former director of the U.S. Geological Survey. So in a way that's like the administrator of NASA, but for geology, right? He's kind of like the head geologist in ways. So he served in that role. Before that, he was a 3-time shuttle astronaut, has a PhD in geology, served in Navy, oceanography. I mean,
just a bona fide badass.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Awesome guy. Perfect for us too, because he understands mining, but he also understands space, and he kind of holds that vision. So it's
for
really
the long-term vision.
Yeah, it's like the perfect person. He has an immense amount of contacts within the government, right? He worked, right, as director of USGS, so he obviously has a lot of pool in the geology and minerals sector. Then we have Dr. Greg Autry, so my former professor, who helps us, has a lot of connections in space, as well as just general business knowledge. That's what his background is in. That's what he's a professor of. Yeah, so that's our board composition right now. Me, Victor. We have some neural network people working for us. Our lead is Will. He's done just amazing work on developing this neural network. He has experience in applied mathematics in the aerospace sector as well. So, but particularly, you said, how did you build out these partnerships? Some of it lends back to my education, right? And that's where I said these degrees actually have done a lot for me. Is they built me a huge network. And Thunderbird, for instance, at Arizona State, it has a lot of people who have worked in the mining sector. Mm-hmm. So a couple of the companies that we're chatting with right now for to be partners and customers, they're Thunderbird alumni, right? So
and I'm curious, you do have this long-term vision for space. Small Business Innovation Research Grants and SITRs. What's the acronym for that? Tech Transfer.
Tech Transfer, yeah.
I don't remember the S.
Small Business Tech Transfer, I think.
Yeah, okay. But the STTR and SBIR. Okay, so you didn't go that route, or
no?
And talk to me, why?
Yeah, so that route has a lot of pros. It in some ways it can have some cons, right? I'm sure there's going to be some people who are like, Eric, why are you saying this? Like, how dare you say this? But it's life, right? Nothing is black and white. It's all gray. The SBIR program is not perfect, right? Historically, you generally had to kind of go through their program and look at all the different SBIRs that were listed and find, one that matched, right, what you were doing, or just try to go solve a problem that they wanted solved, right? And you'd get, very little money in terms of what a startup generally needs. That was a problem for me. I was like, well, I'm not going to get sidetracked on a tech that we don't need to be focused on.
And when you say little money, you have phase 1, 2, and 3 in a sense, right? So phase 1 is up to what's 25? What
50, 75, I think now. Sometimes maybe it'll go to 100.
Up to. And then...
And we're talking 100,000, right? 50,000,
and then phase 2, you have it being in kind of the early low million?
Yes. Yeah.
And then phase 3, it's...
Phase 3 is actually there's no cap, right? Those are more custom. But generally you have to be awarded, phase 1, and then you go to phase 2, and then you go to phase 3, right? Those processes on timelines are not attractive to a business that wants to move fast.
Well, in the startup community, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of talk about kind of accelerating innovation, especially when we talk about the national security implication of it all, and kind of how do you get, that competitive edge.
And I'm literally sitting on the edge of my seat, ready to talk about national security. But we'll get there.
Oh, gosh. And I think, another thing to clear up, it's you have this SBIR program for NASA. You have it for also 25 other government agencies in a sense too, right?
Yeah.
So
the DoD obviously being the largest, but yeah.
Yeah. So you could kind of mix and match, get with a grant writer, management firm, and they can help kind of facilitate that. You might have to put them a little bit of extra cash, a little bit extra being maybe the same amount that you are then awarded for phase 1, just to cover the expense.
It depends on the
partner. Depends on the firm and the partner and all that stuff. But we know of a couple that are great for it. Yeah. You've interfaced with a bunch of them as well. And it's just kind of interesting, right? Because you were solving a problem originally. The origin story of TerraSpace was through your education over in Florida. And you were kind of okay, these are the challenges, these are the problems. And it's just kind of interesting how there's kind of that disconnect between the educational program and then also the SBIR kind of bit.
Yeah.
And I just kind of came to that realization now, after all the time that we've spent together and all that stuff.
After the years that we...
Yeah, and I think it's always been kind of, and maybe we said it indirectly.
But it connected, yeah.
Yeah, but...
And
How
this
do you
is
pair that up with government, I guess?
Yeah, so when we looked at what we were doing, it's like, wow, this has such a massive commercial, like application, right? I mean, this is a commercial company. We do not rely on we can completely run this as a private business that never even touches the government, right? From
That'd be incredible.
Having access from the government or financial capital from the government. I'm not saying that I don't want to do that, right? And I don't want to partner with the government. That's not what I'm saying.
Standing alone without a subsidy in a sense.
I'm saying we don't require them, right? And that's very unique in a lot of deep tech, and particularly things that are related to space and somewhat national security related. Generally, you don't have that capability of being completely private. So when we noticed that, we were like, okay, well, maybe we don't have to go this route because that could hinder us. They do have open topics, right?
Which just got introduced like this past year, right?
Yeah, those are super new. And so the problem, though, with the open topic, it's not necessarily a problem with the open topic. It's a
challenge.
It's a challenge, right? They're offered through a lot of institutions that, when as a mining company, right, we go in and say, hey, we want to do an open topic for someone like the Air Force, right? The Air Force is going to look at us and they're going to say, well, you're focused on like mineral exploration. What does that have to do with us, right?
Well, maybe you can drop it down.
Well,
drop ship.
Right.
Point to point.
Well, what we do is we try to, and this is outside of the SIPR program, this is just DoD wide, is we try to communicate to them the issue of the national security imperative of critical minerals and mining. For the longest time, they didn't get it. I think they're starting to now. And something happened last week that made that huge, in which the DoD is now taking it seriously.
Well, so in the DoD and Defense Innovation Unit, and the gentleman by the name of Major General Bucky Pateau kind of is famously known for kind of this little report that he had done and continues to do on an annual basis. And one of the things that it mentioned was that the U.S. is 10 years behind China in terms of technological readiness and space applications. So what is this new little news that you got? What's the scoop?
So you can go look it up. The Chinese put activated export control restrictions on antimony, which is a strategic mineral. Antimony is critical. It's needed for the production of a multitude of national security-related products. That includes armor-piercing rounds. That includes night vision, precision optics, which ironically, I'm a partner at another company that does precision optics. And so, I never really thought, I shouldn't say I never thought, but I didn't think it would happen this fast that the company that I'm working at over there that does precision optics is somehow going to be impacted by an issue that TerraSpace is working to solve, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, wow, the worlds really do collide. And minerals matter, right, in all of our lives. That's what this shows, right? It also is needed in a lot of things that are outside of national security, right? Precision optics is not just a national security issue, right? You have it in aviation, space technology. You have it in medical, right?
Yeah, LASIK technology or something of that nature.
Well, yeah, you have all these different, strategic. I shouldn't even say strategic. All these like major, right, hardware and tech devices that actually use antimony in it, right? China controls the majority of antimony that the United States consumes. So this actually is a problem for our national security. We do not have much antimony. I think we produce maybe about 18% of what we use.
Where are they?
Antimony? Yeah,
in the U.S.
Yeah, so I think some of those are stockpiled, strategic stockpiles, and then the other portion of it generally comes out of areas that produce like sulfur. So like sulfur springs areas generally are rich in antimony. So I would
maybe Louisiana?
Maybe, you never know.
So if you got some property in Louisiana, maybe try and look that up.
Yeah, right. Be careful about who you sell it to, because there could be a business related to the PRC that's connected, right? And that's very common nowadays.
People's Republic of China.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And I should say that CCP control China. They use People's Republic to sound nice, but they are ruled by an authoritarian dictatorship. I should say a totalitarian dictatorship, actually. So you can tell that, I have some pretty
well, that speaks to your background in terms of your time at United States Space Force Association, or U.S. Space Force Association, representing the United States Space Force branch, and then kind of your aspirations and your, you're from San Antonio, y'all are military city, USA too. So,
so you're always around it. I've been through a lot of education on it, and I want to. This was the primary catalyst for me when I started thinking, hey, why Earth, right? Why focus on this instead of just running off and trying to, send this thing to the moon? We have a lot of mines here, right? We're producing them. We're producing, and I mean on Earth, right? We have a lot of mines. We're producing a lot of minerals, but 90% of the minerals, the strategic minerals, critical minerals that the United States uses, both for national security as well as just high-tech things, right, are produced and shipped to us from China. That's 90%. That is the overwhelming majority, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why the United States and with the CHIPS Act and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
Semiconductor industry also getting Samsung. Over
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That's why they're doing things like that. Now, that is kind of further down the line, right? We're not necessarily focused yet on the source material, right? I think you're gonna start seeing the government take a little bit more action on that, because now they're realizing, we didn't do anything. This is now the fourth mineral that has been strategically restricted, right, from China. So
maybe more further partnerships, and with Australia.
Yes. So, a lot of
already have AUKUS, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What's that acronym?
Australia, UK, US.
Okay, and then there's another one, some treaty.
The Quad. Well, it's not. It's not a treaty.
God, what is it?
The Chinese-led one?
No, it's Australia, US. God, it was something related to launch.
Darn that I wouldn't. I don't remember.
Darn.
We'll look it up.
I thought I shared that with you. Okay.
Yeah, we'll check it out.
So.
Yeah. So it leads to further partnerships with Australia, Canada, countries in Africa and South America as well.
Which China also is acquiring and has acquired many real estate assets all across the world, including potential. There's something on LinkedIn, I don't know, but that little map of the United States and all the property that mainland China owns next to military bases. That is kind of interesting, enlightening, to say the least. But what do you say when it's just everything's a national security issue? Because
a lot of people just
it's national security. Yeah, sure. Everything.
Yeah, but I guess really at that point you have to kind of define what is national security, right? Because there's a lot of people who will say, "Oh, well, it's a national security issue," but they don't really know what they're talking about.
Or
And then you'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, well, they're just going to say it's a national security issue, so I think it's a conspiracy," right? Here's the thing: when a country, right, that is ruled by a government that has explicitly stated that it seeks to replace the United States as the most powerful country on the planet. It has explicitly stated that it wants to do malign influence over our country, right? Which means our people, right? So all of us. That's concerning, right? And so when that country controls 90% of your strategic minerals, why would you do that?
Well,
and especially why would you give a single country access to the 90%? Let's say we live in a world where we're never going to mine in the United States, so we have to import 90% of our strategic minerals. Why are we making it to where it's only going to come from one country?
Yeah, and
that country is antagonistic towards ours.
Yeah, and we're talking about, I guess, global geopolitical events. But let's bring it back to the United States in a sense too, which is would you have a regulated monopoly, or what do we feel about with monopolies here in the United States and Centerpoint and kind of that type of stuff, right?
I'm definitely now we're getting into the area of
economics and
personal opinion on economics. I definitely do not believe that monopolies should exist.
SpaceX is kind of having that issue. That's certainly
right now. Yes.
So Blue Origin. I mean, you want competitive environments, right? So that
without competitive
cost.
So this is my perspective, right? TerraSpace has competitors that are that are trying to do the exact same thing that we're doing, right? We have some advantages over them on hardware and I believe on our software development side as well. But at the end of the day, we are trying to make in situ analysis possible, right? I am okay with them existing. In fact, I'm kind of happy that they exist because it encourages me to make a better product.
Well, and on top of that, it validates your place in the market.
It also validates our place in the marketplace.
Venture funding and stuff like that, right?
Exactly.
When you're trying to raise capital, because if you're the first one there, like
it's
a little rough,
yeah.
All right. I mean, you see that with SpaceX in a sense, and Elon Musk and how he was able to kind of get his way, and Jeff Bezos as well. Oh, I don't know about Jeff Bezos, but yeah.
No. But I agree. I mean, like I don't want to live in a world where SpaceX is the only company. And mind you, I love SpaceX.
Well, I mean,
I love their model. I love their vibe. I love their energy. It's clearly what has made them so successful. And I know a lot of people that work there, and it is they've accomplished so much, and they deserve so much praise for that. That doesn't mean that I want them to be the sole. Good example.
Boeing Starliner. Thank you. I was about to
Boeing.
mention that.
Right.
Yeah.
As a company, just in general, like even with their aviation side of the house having so many problems, right? There are no other really like American competitors, right, in the space. There used to be McDonnell Douglas, right? Lockheed used to make some as well.
Well, you have the ULA.
Well, I'm talking about general aviation. Well, not general aviation, but like commercial aviation airliners, right?
Yes.
You had a multitude of.
It's really just Boeing and Airbus in a sense.
Yeah, but all of those that I just mentioned were Americans. So you had like 4 American companies producing. I mean, technically you had like 5 or 6. I'm probably off. There might be more that were producing airliners, right? And they competed, and you had mergers and you had whatnot. But now we're down to 1, and that one's having a lot of problems. So much so that it absolutely has hurt their image. I mean, I chat with friends, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm on a Boeing. I don't want to be on a Boeing. I want to be on Airbus on my flight." Right? I mean, they'll like text me. It's like I'm not happy. They'll make a joke, right? Yeah. Like I don't know if I'm going to make it or something. And sorry, Boeing.
Statistically speaking, though, you're probably fine. But
yeah, exactly. You're probably fine. I'm just being a realist here.
You want some diversity.
I have a lot of friends at Boeing. Yeah. When I worked at the Space Force Association, we worked with Boeing all the time. Great people doing amazing, extremely important work for our country. There are just very clear problems with, as a bureaucracy, right? The company has issues. And I'll say this. My dad had this quote that he's told me, and it has stuck with me since he told me when I was younger. He said, "Bigness is the enemy of goodness." Now, obviously, bigness is a grammatical error, but he did that on purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Bigness is the enemy of goodness. When things get too big, when companies get too big, when governments get too big,
problems occur
at larger macro scales, right? So that's why when you see a monopoly or anything like that, I'm not about it.
Yeah. So
it doesn't
CCP
breed innovation. CCP, yeah. I mean that's.
So we're bringing that back in that bit, but yeah. Like it's just like if you're buying a car, right? Like like there's a Tesla out there for EVs, but now there's Rivian and then Mercedes and BMW, or just a fossil fuel based car, a petro-based.
There are so many options in the car market.
Yeah, so like why can't we do that as well with mining, aviation, space, rather than just one capsule and launch vehicle? Like let's have 3 or 4, just to, in case somebody gets stuck up there for a little bit too long.
Yeah.
We don't want to. We don't want people dying or anything like that.
No, and it goes right. Like it goes back when you said mining, right, and you said CCP. It goes back to that quote that from Dune, right? He who controls the spice controls the universe. If you're controlling all of the strategic minerals for practically the world, and you have your hand on the faucet and you can turn it on and off, like you're in charge. Mm-hmm. You're in charge. If you turn that off, right, for the United States.
Yeah,
we can't do anything.
And I mean, that's, I think, and
I know that sounds like doomsday. I don't believe that's going to happen, but
yeah, and we're diving too deep in all. I mean,
we are. I'm sorry.
We can always have another recording on
sorry.
specific topics. No, it's fine, dude. Don't be sorry. Bring it back to TerraSpace and where you see it heading in the next few years. I mean, you did mention 7 to 10 years you want to have something.
Well, all this actually matters as to where I see TerraSpace going. So I'm glad we kind of did get to touch on it for the viewers. But particularly when you look at, 5-10 years out is what you're asking?
Well, I mean, look, what are the key milestones you're aiming for?
Yeah.
What are you heading for in the next few years?
Yeah, so because of some of that stuff that's happening on the national security side, we as a company can leverage that, and we're starting a lot of communications with the government, USGS, DOD, DOE, about the fact that about 80% of our own country has not been explored for minerals, right? So working out potential exploration programs, right, with them, enabling us to do it at a more rapid pace rather than, having to ship it off to all these labs. We can do it on site, right? We can really focus in on getting the government understanding of what's out there in our country that we haven't explored for, right, at certain depths.
When you say 80%, GIS is out there, geographical information systems and satellites, to be able to do surveying tools and stuff like that.
Oh, we're talking about subsurface.
We're talking about subsurface. And yes, there's an argument that could be made that GIS can go subsurface, spectrally speaking.
Not at this level. Like that's the other problem.
I just want to differentiate.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are like, well, remote sensing, and it's like, yes, remote sensing can tell you that, hey, something's probably there. It's not going to give you the ore grade.
Yeah. So we have this little globe right here, right? So
yeah,
you can get that. You can get the spectral type on the surface and a little bit down below, but we're talking about a little bit further down.
We're talking about, a couple 100 meters down, even further than that. Like, for instance, the copper mine in Resolution Copper in Arizona. You get in that elevator, you go down 7,000 feet.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool.
Remote sensing is not picking up.
Have you been down that elevator?
Right. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
How long did it take you?
15 minutes. So, when you're looking at that, right, that is where remote sensing falls short. Now, remote sensing can give you a lot of information, and it's needed. So you can couple that information on top of what you learn from drilling. You can create some geophysical maps that are insane. You can train algorithms to understand things in the future. So they're starting to detect patterns from GIS all the way down to what we're doing with subsurface analysis, right? So that's what we'd like to see in the near future, right? That kind of grouping of those two as well.
So key milestones.
Key milestones within 10 years, probably at about the 10-year mark, putting something on the moon, right? But on Earth, really building out and scaling our customer base, getting into both the private market as well as working out some of these programs potentially with the government, like we just talked about, exploring that unexplored 80% of our country. Mm-hmm. All of this, of course, is going to help us get off the teat, so to speak, of China, right? And having to rely on them so much for a lot of our strategic minerals, as well as expand and find new deposits of things that we previously didn't think there was much left of. Helium was one of that. So the helium that you see in balloons and stuff, we were running out of it. We actually discovered a massive deposit. Not we, but America discovered a massive deposit here in the States that we can go.
That was not too long ago, too.
That was last year. Yeah, we actually, up until then, we were like, okay, this is going to run out and it's going to be gone, right? And then we got to that point in which we found something new, right? So that lends credence to why you'd want to work with TerraSpace is let's go out there and discover what we thought maybe we didn't have anymore, right?
Exploring beyond.
Yes.
That's their little tagline on the website.
A little tagline,
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, you mentioned a couple of the recent developments, and I mean, you just had that awesome place, thanks to ASU, helping support your board member, Greg Autry, that little investor showcase.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, what else would you want to share to your listeners, our listeners right now?
Yeah, I mean, think more about minerals, right?
Yeah.
Start kind of digging into it. I know it might not be your field, right? But look into it. I mean, just understand how it impacts your life. Understand how it impacts your own business. And your industry, your sector, right? Because it does. It impacts everybody. We have all this equipment in this room being able to do this podcast. It impacts you, right? Because it's going to impact the price of these different, right, technological pieces. And like drastically could impact the price, right? Also, check us out, right? Look up TerraSpace, get in touch with us. If you're an investor, definitely. Obviously, we want to chat with you.
So you're going through your round right now, your fundraiser, what have you? What are you asking for, or is that public information or not?
Yeah, we're looking for about $3 million for our seed raise, that would enable us to get a couple of these fully built out. Right now, the algorithms developed. It's more so just getting the access to the hardware so we can deploy on site instead of getting the data from previous scans or at least previous logging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, and it's great, right? Because I think the mining industry is completely undervalued in terms of the public image and the perception of it all. And I mean, it does play into kind of the CHIPS Act, semiconductor issue, national security component. Can't speak. And then also, I mean, the clean energy transition and like the energy climate week. We have in Houston, the Houston Energy Climate Week coming up in September 9th through 13th. I think there's two of them. There's a Houston Energy Climate Week conference, and then like there's the Houston Energy Climate Week Startup Week.
Man.
Yeah, so we got a lot of things going on.
It's capital energy, right?
Yeah, so I guess just everyone and their mom is trying to, show up. So, I mean, it's great. But I bring that up, the clean energy transition, it does have applications there.
It's huge.
So
lithium, whatever it is, right? It's mining.
Yeah, no, but I mean, awesome to be here with you, Eric.
Thanks so much.
It's been fantastic to kind of talk about it. And I guess we'll have to dude, we could have gone on so many little bit rabbit holes, but maybe
we could have done one of those super long form ones.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't know. Let's spare people of that.
Yeah.
But it's just great to kind of learn a little bit more about where you're at, where you want to be with TerraSpace, and kind of, your origin story with it all. So again, pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining this conversation with Gallant.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained meaningful insight.
If you find this entertaining or helpful, subscribe and leave us a review.
And don't forget to share this conversation with your network.
For more resources and to stay updated with Gallant Insights and our amazing client portfolio companies, visit gallantculture.com.
Join us next time as we continue to explore perspectives within the industrial innovation space propelling us forward.
Until then, we ask you to stay thoughtful and curious.